Steiner education began 100 years ago, and it's often a question, are we still relevant? It's a question that's probably added to by the fact that we still use things like chalkboards, blackboards, and particularly in the primary school, we really like things to be done manually. We don't encourage early IT uptake and so on. So sometimes that can be a perception of Steiner education. But having been involved in it now for many years, I've more and more come to the view that, in fact, the 21st century is the time for Steiner education. In fact, as Wolfgang very rightly quoted that lovely Chinese proverb, which I hadn't heard before, but it's so true. He was looking 100 years ahead for the challenges that would face the generations that we are now living through. And if there are many ways of looking at this. I've only got a few minutes, but the one thing that probably says it more than anything else is the fact that when Steiner outlined his initial vision of education, he called it a healing education. Now, by healing education, he didn't mean children are sick. He meant that we need to bring balance to ourselves as human beings. And he brought actually a bigger vision of education that was more than just the transmission of information. So much of education at his time and still today is about passing on information. Steiner was saying if we're going to educate and have schools, we need to educate the whole person. And as human beings, we have a brain which processes information, but we also have an emotional life, we have a will life, an action, and education needs to encompass all of them. And a healing education was to bring all of these into a state of balance. Now, if you look at mainstream education, what's the most significant difference that has happened over about the past decade? The whole impulse in what education is has changed dramatically. It's happened so quickly and so subtly that I think a lot of people haven't realized the impact of it. The most significant word that's used in education today is well-being, the well-being of students. And in fact, every school in Australia now is demanded to have a well-being framework of how they manage and maintain the well-being of their students. Now, this is exactly what Steiner was talking about. It's a change, profound change in what education is. When I went to school, education was just about still the transmission of knowledge and the academic, in a sense, competitive race to get to the top. Any mental health issues, emotional issues were seen as, in a sense, collateral damage. They were like civilian casualties in a war. Whereas now it's seen that schools have a direct responsibility and it's even part of the curriculum. Now, this is absolutely living out Steiner's initial vision of education, of what it is and what it should be. Now, of course, the vision of what that looks like in mainstream schools can be different, but it's just one small example of how Steiner pioneered a whole radical new vision of what education should be. And what I'd like to do tonight is just quickly run you through an overview to just outline the ways in which Steiner education is so relevant. Now, one of the key ways of doing it is exactly what Wolfgang outlined, that our education, our curriculum, our methods are very much, to use a professional term, age appropriate. In other words, we really look at the child and see what stage is the child going through, what is the way in which they learn, and we adapt our methods and our curriculum to their learning needs at that particular stage. So let's just have a look at the stages that we go through, because Steiner education unfolds and manifests a balanced form, a healing education, by working with these natural organic changes in the way that we grow into being adults. We don't just at 3 years old suddenly start being able to do calculus. We actually have to grow gradually, and our brain changes and our emotional life unfolds, and we go through a series of stages as we grow up. And this picture of the developing human being is at the very heart of Steiner education. And probably our most significant way of working with a healing education and a well-being education is to work with these natural stages. So let's just look at these particular stages. What's the child's first impulse of learning about the world is, what do they want to do when they see an adult doing something that's new? They want to do the same thing. They want to imitate. This is our first form of learning. It's like a whole body learning. And our thinking is very concrete, it's very physical, and we learn through imitating what we see around us. Now, if I was to put this into a little graphic, if you just forgive me making a kind of diagram, as to really give you some visual representation of these stages. Play is really this very first form of learning that we go through. You see, as we grow up, we also, in a sense, grow down. We start with a very beautiful sense of being part of the world, and then at a certain stage, we separate out from the world. We become a separate self. This is an important part of the early few 8, 9, 10 years of childhood. We separate out. And as we do that, we learn about the world in different ways. And this first way of learning through play is a very significant one because it needs to be unfolded. The child needs to experience it. And with each stage of learning, if we can let it unfold and really live it out, we harvest certain learnings from it and we take those with us into adult life. If we shut it down too early, it can actually be, in a sense, a little bit damaged. It can be a little bit undeveloped. But if it's allowed to flourish, it takes a harvest and a kind of treasure almost for later life. And if a child who has a very rich, joyful play life in their early years, right up in those first about 7 years, we think this is an important time, they take with them a gift of a creative will into adult life. And then around 6 or 7, as the child's starting formal learning, our brain changes again and we start to think a little bit differently. We start to learn in a different way. Picasso put it very delicately. He said, every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist when we grow up. Now, this is something that really resonates profoundly with Steiner education because we build our teaching methods in the primary school through imagination, as Wolfgang put so beautifully, through stories, through drama, through plays, through putting on plays, through drawing, through color. All of these things build the child's imagination. And this is the way the child is starting to learn now, through images. So rather than learning directly as through their body in play, and different again from as we learn in adults where we learn purely abstractly, child learns in primary school through images. So instead of just introducing a letter, for example, when we start the learning the alphabet, we bring it to them through an image of something in the world that they can see, which they can then turn into the abstract form of a letter. For example, here, a tree. We might have a story about a tree, and then out of that, we abstract the elements of the trunk and the branches into forming the letter T. And this goes for all the things that we do. We also have a very rich life for the children in learning crafts, where they're learning to actually make things. And this is an example of the balance that we have, where we really learn the balance head, heart, and hand. We want to give them a curriculum that teaches them how to actually make things in a very warm, rich, but child-friendly, but child-appropriate, but also important particular crafts. And if we were to summarize this next stage of learning in the primary school, we'd say it's this imagination becomes this second tier in learning. And what this does, as Wolfgang mentioned, when the child hears a story, when they paint a picture, what really is engaged in them? Their feelings are engaged. And this is so important because education can then be also learning about, to use the formal psychological term, emotional literacy. They learn to feel. They develop a rich, strong feeling life. And that becomes a gift that they take with them into the high school. Now, around adolescence, we start to change again. And puberty is not just a physical change of being capable of reproduction. It's also a brain change. Our brain starts to think in a more causal way. We start to connect one thing to another. And this is a natural process that happens around the age of 12, 13, 14. Some children a little bit earlier, some a little bit later, but on average around this age. And then we start to think, we could say causally or even critically. We can pull things apart. But at the same time, in Steiner education, we work with this. This is when we start more formal learning, particularly in things like mathematics, but we still bring it an artistic mood and an artistic feeling, always trying to help the child see the connection between the world outside themselves and the world inside. So things like geometry, being able to see how we can think geometrically and we can create geometric forms, like understand what is a hexagon, but also see it in the world outside ourselves. Now, this gives the child a deeper sense of security in the world. There is a certain inner unity between what's inside us and what's out in the world. And if I was to summarize this third stage, we could say that being able to reason and to think causally is a very important part of your high school development. And in Steiner education, these three stages give us gifts that we take into our adult life. If I was to summarize it almost like as a kind of half of a parabola, we could call it these stages of development that run through our schools of play, imagination, and then some intellectual achievement, all leading to the child stepping out into the wider world. Now, if we were to look at the other half of life, what does the child then take with them? Once they go out into the world, their task then is to make a meaningful life. It's to take all of these experiences that they've had as children and in schools and to refine as an adult that beautiful sense of connection between themselves and the world that we have instinctively as children. Our task as adults is to be able to find that ourselves. As Steiner put it very beautifully, our highest endeavour is to produce young men and women who out of themselves are able to find meaning and direction in their own lives. Now, how does this relate to the 21st century? Well, you may have heard of what they call the 4 C's. These are the 4 capabilities that have been said to really make for success in the 21st century. The world is no longer, in a sense, one of information that you have to learn and you have to carry with you. As Wolfgang said, so much of education has changed. Now it's about capabilities and being able to manage information that is freely available, but having the personal capacities. And the 4 capabilities that are known as the 4 C's are critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And one of the great mysteries is, how do we develop this? Well, it's become my very firm view that Steiner education actually lays down the foundations for success in the 21st century. You look at those 3 areas that I just outlined of what a good education gives us: a creative will from our younger years, a rich feeling life from our primary school years, and then what I call big thinking, or being able to reason as in high school. All of these each align with these qualities of the 4 C's. Critical thinking, obviously, but what does feeling life give you? It gives you a sense of being able to communicate, to collaborate with other people. And one of the mysterious things about in modern education is, how do we build creativity? They even try and teach courses in it at university, but my view there is they've started at the wrong end. We are all naturally creative as children, and the secret is to allow that to flourish and to being able to harvest that and taking it with you as an adult. So to answer the question that Wolfgang sent me of how relevant is Steiner education today, I would have to say I think it's more relevant than ever. And we have many things to share with mainstream education that I think will enrich and nourish their view of what education is. And so I would urge you all to consider how you can, in a sense, take up your part in this new form of education that is a real gift to the 21st century.